how do you count a deadline? I mean, we've all faced one, right?
Oh, definitely.
Whether it's getting your taxes filed or maybe a big project at work,
Yeah.
completing some mandatory training or something. You count the days, you mark it down. Usually, it seems pretty simple.
Usually, yeah. But what happens when counting those days is, like, incredibly critical. So critical that missing a deadline because it lands on a Saturday and you don't act until Monday. Well, what if that triggers a massive, life-changing 10-year legal penalty?
Wow. Yeah, that tiny difference, Saturday versus Monday, could literally determine the future for an entire family.
That's exactly it.
And that is precisely what we're unpacking today. We're doing a deep dive into a pretty recent Supreme Court decision, Monsalvo Velázquez versus Bondi, the Attorney General. This was decided back in April 2025.
And this case basically forced the highest court in the land to answer what sounds like a technical question, but it has huge consequences.
The question being, what exactly does the word days mean in federal immigration law when you're calculating these really high-stakes deadlines?
So our mission today is to walk you through the human story behind this, the legal arguments, the back and forth, and then the final answer the court landed on.
And this isn't just some abstract legal debate. It really gets to the heart of legal predictability, consistency, how the smallest word in a law can shape someone's ability to, well, live and work and raise their kids here.
Right. It affects real people, real families.
Okay, so let's dive in. Before we get sort of lost in the legal statutes and all the procedural stuff, let's focus on the person. Mr. Hugo Monsalvo Velázquez. He's the reason this whole deadline question ended up at the Supreme Court.
Right. So Mr. Monsalvo Velázquez, he was born in Mexico. He came to the U.S. without authorization when he was a teenager, maybe about 20 years ago now.
And like so many people, he didn't just pass through, he put down serious roots.
Deep roots, yeah. In Colorado, he got married, he owns a home near Denver, runs his own small business.
And he has 2 kids who are U.S. citizens, an 11-year-old son and 10-year-old daughter. I mean, the stakes for him, for his family,
Right.
They couldn't be higher.
Absolutely. So fast forward to 2011, and the government started removal proceedings against him. Eventually, an immigration judge found him removable.
Okay.
But he was granted permission for something called voluntary departure. VD for short.
Yeah.
It's a specific provision in the law, allows someone up to 60 days to leave the country on their own terms.
Voluntary departure. It might sound kind of bureaucratic, but you're saying it's actually a really big deal. It's like a bargain almost.
It's a crucial bargain, yeah. For the government, it saves money and hassle. They don't have to detain someone. They don't have to arrange a forced removal flight.
Okay, that makes sense from their side.
But for Mr. Monsalvo, it lets him control how and when he leaves, which is important practically and emotionally. It avoids certain fines.
Yeah.
But the most critical thing...
Let me guess, it relates to future penalties.
Exactly.
Huh.
It helps him avoid these absolutely devastating penalties that come with a formal forced deportation.
And that key penalty is?
It's a 10-year bar. If you're forcibly removed or if you're granted voluntary departure but you fail to leave on time, the law says you're ineligible for almost any kind of immigration relief like visas or green cards for a full decade.
10 years. Wow. That basically slams the door shut on legally returning or fixing your status for a very long time.
It's a huge consequence. So meeting that 60-day deadline, either by leaving or by filing a specific legal motion to pause things, it was absolutely vital for his future options.
Okay, so that sets the stage perfectly for the core conflict, the contested deadline itself.
Yeah.
Mr. Monsalvo got this new 60-day VD period, and it started on October 12th, 2021.
Right. Now, if you just count 60 days straight on the calendar from October 12th, where do you land?
Let's see, October has 31 days, so 19 left in October, I need 41 more. November has 30, need 11 more. December 11th, a Saturday.
Precisely. Saturday, December 11th, 2021. That was day 60. So to avoid that 10-year penalty, he had to either be gone from the U.S. by that Saturday or file a motion to reopen his case before that Saturday deadline expired.
And what did he do?
He chose the motion route. But he didn't file it on Saturday.
He filed it on
Nuzday, the next business day, Monday, December 13th, 2021.
And that 2-day difference, Saturday to Monday, that became the whole issue. The government agency said that was too late.
That's exactly right. Both the Board of Immigration appeals the BIA, which reviews immigration judge decisions, and then the Federal Appeals Court for his region, the 10th Circuit, they both ruled against him.
On what grounds?
They basically said days means days.
Right.
Calendar days, no exceptions, no extensions, just because the deadline falls on a weekend or a holiday. So filing on Monday meant he missed the deadline, and boom, the 10-year penalty applied.
Okay, but hang on. Something feels off there. Didn't you mention, or maybe I read, that the immigration judge, the first person who granted the VD, actually said the deadline would extend to Monday.
You're right to be confused. That's one of the fascinating wrinkles here. Yes, the immigration judge who granted the 60 days specifically calculated the deadline as Monday the 13th, precisely because day 60 was a Saturday.
So the judge on the ground level applied a common-sense weekend rule. How did the BIA and the 10th Circuit justify overturning that specific calculation? That seems like a direct contradiction.
It does, and it highlights the confusion the single word days was causing nationwide. The BIA's reasoning was quite technical. They argued that the statute authorizing voluntary departure didn't explicitly say exclude weekends.
Okay.
So they defaulted to calendar days. They also tried to draw a line, saying filing a document in court might get extended over a weekend. That's procedural. But the act of leaving the country is substantive, and you can theoretically fly out any day of the week.
That distinction feels a bit thin, especially since he was filing a motion, not physically leaving.
The Supreme Court ultimately agreed with you, but that was the BIA's logic, and it created this situation where even within the government's own system, the experts couldn't agree on how to count.
Which led to what lawyers call a circuit split, right? Different federal courts saying different things.
It's exactly. The 10th Circuit's ruling here directly contradicted a ruling from the 9th Circuit out on the West Coast, which had allowed the deadline extension in similar situations.
And when two major federal appeals courts disagree on federal law?
That's when the Supreme Court usually steps in.
Yeah.
They have to resolve the split and create one uniform rule for the entire country.
Okay, so the stage is set for the Supreme Court. But then there was another hurdle, a jurisdictional one. This sounds like it gets even more complicated.
It does get a bit wonky here, yeah. Before the justices could even decide how to count the days, they had to figure out if they were even allowed to hear the case. It's about whether the court has the power, the jurisdiction, to decide.
And the government argued they didn't have jurisdiction. Why?
Right. The government put up a strong fight on this. They pointed to the specific law that allows court reviews of deportation orders, Section 1252. They argued that this law only lets you challenge the underlying decision about whether someone is removable in the first place.
So, like, challenging whether Mr. Monsalvo should even be deported at all?
Exactly. But Mr. Monsalvo wasn't challenging that anymore. He accepted he was removable. He was only challenging the calculation of the 60-day deadline, a term within the final order.
So the government's argument was, since you're not fighting the main deportation decision itself, just this deadline detail, the courts can't hear your case.
That was their position, which, if you think about it, is a pretty tough stance.
It sounds like a catch-22. What would that mean for people in his situation?
Well, the Supreme Court saw the problem right away. If the government's view won, people would have to basically lie, or, as the court put it, raise meritless claims about whether they should be deported.
Pretend they weren't removable.
Just to get a judge to look at a perfectly valid technical legal question about the deadline calculation or some other procedural error in the order, it would clog the courts with fake arguments just to fix real errors.
That seems completely counterproductive. It's like saying you can only complain about a typo on your speeding ticket if you also falsely claim you weren't speeding at all.
That's a great analogy. And the court basically said, no, that can't be right. The majority firmly rejected the government's narrow interpretation.
How did they justify their jurisdiction?
They said the law allows review of final orders of removal and, critically, all questions of law that arise from those orders.
And the meaning of 60 days is definitely a question of law from the order.
Undeniably. It's a core part of the order itself. So the court said, yes, we absolutely have jurisdiction to review the terms and conditions of the removal order, including deadlines, not just the initial decision to remove someone.
Okay, jurisdictional hurdle cleared. Finally, the main event. How do we count the days? Calendar days or business days? The court acknowledged these two possible meanings, right?
Yes. Ordinary meaning, just count every single day. Or a specialized legal meaning, if the deadline falls on a weekend or holiday, it rolls over to the next business day. This rollover rule is super common in federal courts, like under Rule 6 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure.
So which way did they go and why? What was the deciding factor?
They went with the specialized meaning, the rollover rule. But the reason is key. It wasn't just because it's common in other courts. They relied heavily on a principle called long-standing administrative construction.
Okay, long-standing administrative construction. That sounds important, but also very legalistic. What does that actually mean in plain English?
It basically means looking at how the agency itself, the immigration agency, in this case, has interpreted and applied its own rules over a long period of time.
So like digging into historical practice.
Exactly. The court looked back, way back, even before this specific 60-day voluntary departure law was written in 1996. They found that since at least the 1950s.
The 1950s, wow.
The immigration agency's own regulations about how to calculate time limits have consistently said that if a deadline falls on a Sunday or a legal holiday, or later they added Saturday, it gets extended to the next business day.
Ah, I see. So the court's logic was, this weekend holiday extension rule was already the standard operating procedure within immigration law for decades before Congress created this specific 60-day VD deadline in 1996.
Precisely. Congress passed that 1996 law against that existing backdrop. The assumption, the court said, is that Congress knew about this long-standing practice and intended for the same counting rules to apply to the new 60-day deadline they were creating. They didn't need to spell it out explicitly because it was already the established norm.
That makes a lot of sense. Presuming consistency, do they have other reasons too?
Yes, they also pointed to internal consistency within that same 1996 law itself. That same section of the law includes other deadlines, like a 90-day deadline for filing a motion to reopen, or a 30-day one for a motion to reconsider.
Okay.
And the government conceded that for those deadlines in the very same section, the rollover rule does apply. The deadline extends to the next business day if it falls on a weekend.
Wait, so the government admitted the rollover rule applied for a 90-day deadline in the same law, but argued it didn't apply for the 60-day deadline. How could they justify using the same word days differently in the same piece of legislation?
They couldn't, convincingly. The court basically said that's illogical. The word days has to mean the same thing throughout that section of the law. You can't just pick and choose.
Right. Consistency matters. They also rejected that BIA distinction between leaving the country and filing a motion.
They did. They said the 60-day period isn't just for physically leaving. It's a period to take some kind of action to comply or resolve the situation, whether that's departing, filing a motion, or getting affairs in order. The same counting rule should apply regardless of which compliance option you choose.
So the final ruling was clear.
Crystal clear. The Supreme Court held that under Section 1229 CB, a voluntary departure deadline that falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday extends to the next business day.
Which means Mr. Monsalvo's motion filed on Monday the 13th.
It was timely. He met the deadline.
Wow. So at the end of the day, what does this really mean, this deep dive into the definition of day?
Well, first and foremost, it provided immense relief for Mr. Monsalvo and his family. He wasn't hit with that decade-long penalty simply because his deadline landed on a Saturday.
That's huge on a human level.
Absolutely. But more broadly, for you, the listener, it underscores the importance of consistency and predictability in our legal system. Agencies can't just apply rules arbitrarily.
Yeah, you need to know what the rules are, especially when the stakes are so high, like keeping your family together or being able to work.
Exactly. And it affirms a kind of practical common sense. The system should account for the fact that government offices are closed on weekends and holidays, and people often need access to lawyers or those offices to take action. You shouldn't be penalized for the calendar falling a certain way.
It feels like a victory for, well, common sense and fairness and process.
I think many would see it that way. It ensures judicial review can correct these kinds of procedural errors.
So here's a final thought to leave everyone with. This whole case, protecting this family's future, it turned entirely on these administrative regulations that were apparently sitting there since the 1950s. Rules probably very few people ever thought about.
Until they suddenly became critical.
Right. So it makes you wonder, if fundamental life-altering outcomes can hinge on these decades-old, maybe forgotten or unchallenged administrative details, what other fine print might be quietly shaping the legal systems, the financial rules, even our workplace procedures that we rely on every single day?
That's a really interesting question. What other assumptions are we making based on rules we haven't looked at in ages?
Definitely something to think about next time you're counting down the days to any kind of deadline.